Hey, and we are the Coalition Loud and Proud. It is in the wee hours, if you will, in City Hall, in the City Council chambers of our, well, as we always say, the parish of Northern Rhode Island, Woonsocket. At some point, will the City Council tackle, I think one of the biggest challenges is the absence of any type of fine dining at any level here in the city of Woonsocket. By law, be kept open as long as City Council is running.
Was there a question in there?
Yeah, absolutely. When are you going to keep some damn restaurants open here later?
Oh, okay.
We're sitting out there in executive session, chewing away at the furniture. But anyway, a lot happened tonight. Let's first of all start with the city planner. What can you say?
The planning director came in to answer questions for us, and we asked some very pointed questions, and we got some very specific answers. I have to speak with the solicitor and sort of wrap my head around the answers and what it conveys, or what I can convey to the public about what those answers reflect for the public's consumption. But there was some meaningful dialogue about where this all started and what his role was, and he was very forthright in his answers, actually.
Is he still an employee of the city of Woonsocket?
He is still appointed to the city of Woonsocket. The only person who has control over that is the mayor, and the mayor has, in his own mind, decided that Mr. DeBrois is somebody that he's going to work with, and work with in a way that avoids any kind of issues arising that could be, in any way, develop into what we just went through.
Are there any other, and I understand this is personnel matters, and there's a legal gulf there, and also there's regardless of some of the outcomes, these folks were long-term employees, have family here, and they're members of the community. So, there's a delicacy that needs to be taken to heart. Are there any other city employees that right now you would consider at peril?
In peril, no. There are there are other employees who were involved, but they were involved as employees who were following the direction of the instruction given to them by their supervisors, whether it's Mr. DeBrois or through the Mr. DeBrois from the mayor, the former mayor. And I still have posed questions to our advisor that advised on the CDBG program as to his knowledge and his interactions with the staff and the mayor, the former mayor, about how this transaction took place and how it was planned and designed, and how his role as our advisor was integral in that transaction taking place.
What's on the docket for Monday, if you will, that is impactful of this particular situation?
I'm not aware at this point. I haven't really looked at the docket for Monday to see what's on there, but there is no more closed session related to more questions. I've got questions pending. There's emails pending to be posted to the website. And I'm waiting for answers from the consultant. And at this point, I don't know that there's anything specific on the agenda for Monday that would relate to this matter.
Can you briefly explain to folks who may not be familiar with the Sosa case, just a very brief outline of what has it been agreed that's happened there?
Well, I think what's been agreed has happened, and what I drew from the conversation was the fact that it became clear to me that the planning department was not as a part of a collaborative group of people, administrators in City Hall, making plans for the future of the city. It was basically the former mayor would make a decision about what she wanted to do in her own mind, and then she would direct people to flesh out the transaction. And it very often revolved around her experience doing business with certain people and real estate.
Right.
And that's what this was, one of those things. It was not that the advisor or the solicitor or the planning director had input into the choice of Mr. Bork's property for this particular development. It was simply an instruction that came from the mayor to work out a solution for the use of funds to acquire Mr. Bork's property, because it appears that the former mayor simply had the idea in her head to use the federal funds to develop housing up there. Not just any property, but Mr. Bork's property.
Right.
And I think that comes out of their long-standing relationship going back all the way into the early 2000s where they did business together in various real estate matters.
Is fair to say that the city of Woonsocket is no longer in the real estate business?
Well, I would hope so. It does seem to have been that we were doing a lot of real estate transactions in the last 10 years. Some of it was legitimately justified in the fact that it was removing some blight. And some of it was targeted early on in this previous mayor's administration, where it was taking out some blight. But then there were other things that happened that were, I guess, not necessary, and became somewhat what many close inside were considering somewhat manipulative. And it was at the behest of the former mayor herself, not necessarily a discussion about why the city should move in a certain direction or have conversations with other parties about ways to approach development and affordable housing initiatives and things of that nature.
Coming out of any sort of repressive regime, and that's how our station refers to the last 10 years or so, we'll always have anecdotes and stories arising, but there appears to be emerging some sort of pattern where real estate purchases were made for political reasons, sort of as a bludgeon. Are there more issues to come?
I don't think so. There may be more discussion about what was characterized with the previous council members who removed the mayor, about the culture in City Hall, about the heavy-handed role the mayor played in creating a situation where I can only think to go back to Mayor Menard, where there was always some tongue-in-cheek humor about the fact that she managed to go through about 7 or 8 police chiefs while she was the mayor in her term. And this particular mayor, Valdelli Hunt, went through 6 tax assessors, 5 planning directors, 5 treasurers, 2 finance directors.
Like the drummer in Spinal Tap.
Yeah, okay. It was the kind of environment that had people leaving because there was this heavy hand, as I guess I'd call it, in dealing with the staff and dealing with what they were allowed to do. And for instance, I came into City Hall to look at some public records that I had asked to see, and there were some employees, rank and file, and some other people at a higher level that were read the Riot Act by allowing me into City Hall to look at a public document. Now, I was a member of the City Council, and they were read the Riot Act for actually allowing me to come into City Hall without getting permission from her.
The nerve, the sheer gall, the temerity.
Right, to not getting permission from her. And I gave another example this evening where I came in to have a conversation with the city clerk as a member of the City Council about council matters. And in that conversation, while I sat in her office, out behind me came the former finance director to make copies in the clerk's office, even though there was a copier in the finance department that she could have easily used. But it was more about intimidation. It was more about informing about the fact that I was in City Hall and letting people know that they were watching me. And it was really a very, very weird and unprofessional kind of environment going on. And frankly, I think some of it was borderline harassment of the employees, and many of them simply left without pursuing charges or complaints that they may have been able to.
There are many of us who will remember a certain event at a certain park in downtown and a certain weekend where, as if by magic, town employees showed up to
make loud noises,
run a leaf blower, dump truck, a variety of issues, which we found astonishingly responsive to the people, the good people of Woonsocket, that they would do so on a weekend voluntarily.
Well, I just spoke with someone in the last few days who had the early on experience some years ago of something that I know occurred in other cases, which was that people who had unpleasant interactions with the mayor's family were visited by police officers to ask them to curtail their negative interactions with the mayor's family. And that's a two-way street, and it's free speech among people on social media. And so I guess, the right answer to the police officer would be go away.
Right. Now, there seems to be a trail of tears here that's being quickly exposed, dissected, and solved by the city council, and not the least of which was made statewide news. And of course, that's the Enrique Sosa versus City of Woonsocket Police Department. What specifically happened there? Do I have the right case? Let me just double check that.
You're right.
Okay. What, if you can give us just a snapshot of what actually happened in the case, because there's a lot of folks who aren't familiar with it because of the age.
Okay, he was a police officer in Woonsocket, and he had a girlfriend, I guess it was, up in Uxbridge. And at one point, he was in a domestic dispute, I guess they call it, and she had a knife in her hand, and he took the knife from her and must have threatened her or something to that effect. And he ultimately was charged with a felony, and he was a police officer in Woonsocket, charged with a felony in Massachusetts. And then he agreed to a settlement, which in Rhode Island we refer to as pleading nolo, which means I'm not disputing the facts, and
Right.
we'll, sort of file it and put it behind us. It's a similar plea, but it's not exactly the same. And the police department used that plea as the basis to say that you've admitted to a felony and therefore you're fired, because we could fire somebody for that. And he appealed it into court because he wasn't given a LEOBOR hearing,
Right.
police officer's Bill of Rights hearing. And the court pretty much determined that we should have given him a LEOBOR hearing. And instead of doing the hearing, the city administration chose to appeal that decision to Supreme Court and ultimately lost. And so he never got his LEOBOR hearing. He won the case for his claim that he was improperly discharged, and in the interpretation of the Massachusetts statute that didn't translate equally to Rhode Island. And so basically the city lost a couple of years ago, and it has been in a negotiation to settle since then. And this is where we came to this evening, where that was the number that came from something much more down to what is. And at some point, you simply have to decide that it's time to
Right.
finish it up and put it in the drawer and move on.
Was there a conscious decision by the city to, in a sense, assess all of these? We've heard about the tax litigation. Now we're hearing about the LEOBOR litigation. There are, on the next city council docket, a variety of settlements and issues. How difficult has it been to get your arms around all of this chaos? Because it is self-induced chaos, if you will, by the former
To a
administration.
certain extent, it is. Much of it has been trickling up to us slowly over the years. Towards the end of the last council term, there was more of it starting to come up and getting settled because the solicitor was sort of pushing hard to get some of this done. But there were more than a dozen cases of tax appeals going on through court rather than just through the appeal process. And it really revolved around the work of one of the prior tax assessors, where values were just, I can't even explain where they may have come from, but the Tax Assessment Board of Review was ruling against her, and/or that people would take them to court. And of course, the courts don't like to make definitive decisions about these things. They like to see a negotiated settlement.
Correct.
And so it tends to get postponed and postponed and postponed until you settle. And so now we are getting to the point where this burden has just become so overwhelming that it can actually slow down our ability to govern. And we need to clear these decks and get back on a straight path. And so the assessor has been working with the solicitor, and they're working on coming up with some settlements that are reasonable to either refund or to offer a discounted future bill to offset the adjustments and get these things out of the way of doing a good job again.
The city, in reality, truly has a balance sheet, and that balance sheet needs to be clean not only for audit purposes, but quite frankly, I would imagine for to have a legitimate interpretation of what your tax rolls and your tax burdens and your tax receipts are actually going to be.
That's exactly right, and that's the problem. With all of this litigation around going on, it affects what you're showing in terms of what you're going to collect. It affects how you can set up your tax levy in future years. And the only way to have a sound basis for it is to agree upon what the values are going to be year over year. And yes, they go through this adjustment whenever you have a revaluation, but those are things that you settle on. You don't necessarily litigate them all.
Right.
And the hard line stance usually is not a winning proposition for a community. It is all about coming to some reasonable settlement over things that are disputed. When we can get back to that, maybe we can get back to managing the city better internally, in-house, as well as externally in the interests of the public.
I would imagine, too, it sends a clear signal to the business community who face enough challenges cost-wise and economically to develop up here. It can't be helpful to have been carrying this reputation as being, I'll use the term belligerent.
That's a good term. And you're right. It's not a good message to send to businesses that you're not willing to settle matters that should be settled and negotiate solutions. And maybe we can put that behind us now that there's a change in leadership and the staff understands that the rules that were are not the rules that will be. And we will go about doing a better job of managing the city.
A couple of real quick things. I know it's been a long day. First of all, do you anticipate any more SOSAs, if you will, of that size?
No, not in terms of an employment issue. There's some tax valuation appeals that are fairly large that need to be cleared up. But some of them, like I said, some of them will be against future billings, and some of it will be cash settlements. It's hard to really say what that is. The assessor has told us he's going to be bringing us more of these cases to try to settle out. But it really becomes a job for the tax assessor and the solicitor to negotiate with these people to come to an understanding of what is affordable for the city and what is affordable for them. And frankly, I hate to say it, but it'll put a lot of lawyers out of work if we do it successfully.
Right.
But that's okay. They have other things to do.
So this purge, if you will, that's taking place right now, in a sense, it's getting it off the town's balance sheet. I assume you have a fiscal year ending in June 30th?
Yeah, fiscal year is June 30th.
Ending in June 30th. So one can hope then that in the next fiscal year, ending, I guess, June 30th, 2025, you'll have a reasonably clean, quote-unquote, balance sheet and an ability to manage the town's finances more.
Yes, but what that points to, I think, is that the budget preparation for the next fiscal year is going to be awkward and difficult because much of what we're doing, if it does affect cash payments, that would affect our bottom line or the use of previous year's surplus because it applies to previous years, should that be the choice. Either way, it's a bottom line hit if we're paying out cash.
Right.
And we need to be able to address that shrinkage to our surplus or our bottom line without overburdening the taxpayers with large tax increases. So we need to find a balance in there somewhere, and it's going to be a challenge in the next budget cycle.
But to be optimistic, this is not unlike a company facing a private company facing some losses that effectively they're going to swallow the bitter pill.
Well, we're just shy of a reorganization, which would put us back in a budget commission. But no, we're not going there. We're going to fix this, and we're going to find a way to make it work.
Interesting. Are things that challenged?
They could be if we're not careful. That's the thing. There's so many. That's the thing that has to be uncovered in some respect. We have talk of a lot of issues. They're not all quantified for the council yet, at least for me, in terms of what they represent in terms of dollar risk to the city. So we have some of them. We've been discussing some of them. There are others. They haven't been brought to us because they're being worked on. I don't know what the total bottom line risk is for all of us.
Right.
And our surpluses are not overwhelmingly high.
Right.
Many good accountants will contend that it should always be higher, and then people say you're overtaxing us. But the fact is, There will be challenges, and you always have to have some sort of reserve to fall back on so
Right.
that you don't, or as I like to call it, so that your tax burden growth is smooth rather than jerky.
Right.
You don't want it going up and going down, going up and going down just because of political promises and political pain. You'd really rather have a attempt in a political environment to create a stability that allows for something that's more acceptable and reasonable for the people who live in your city.
Fair enough. Last quick question on a happier note. Progress made in the supermarket issue.
Well, it's a prospect that's being worked on by various parties, including the buyer and the seller. They still have yet to work out their deal, but there is negotiation going on to have someone acquire the property so that a market could go into a location that's in the downtown area, not Main Street, but a downtown area.
Right, and you know, the success there in ending the quote-unquote food desert status that's been accorded to Woonsocket
Yeah.
could be over, and you bringing properties onto the tax roll as opposed to selling them at bargain basement prices. I mean, there's always that. I mean, call us crazy, but there's a lot of hopeful signs, aren't there? I mean, I think Wall Street uses the term green shoots.
They use the term what?
Green shoots, look, green grass coming up from the.
Okay. Yes, and I don't want to compare it to some of our national parks burning to the ground. And yes, there are green shoots that pop up right after that. Everything comes up fresh. We're not there. It wasn't that bad, but there is a certain amount of relief that comes with us just having a different administration, moving in a different direction.
Popping the balloon.
That's just hopefully going to make people understand that we are actually a nice place to be and a nice place to live and a nice place to do business.
Excellent. Woonsocket City Council President John Ward, summing up this week's activity, as always, we're grateful for your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.